Hi there. Today I'm taking a look at a wine from Bordeaux, in particular Chateau Loudenne, a wine labelled as a Medoc, and it's a Cru Bourgeois, and this is the 2016 vintage of that. What you'll find is if a wine is labelled as Medoc, that means it's from a region called the Bas Medoc at the very north of the of Bordeaux's Medoc region, because anything else from the Medoc would either be labelled with its commune name or would be labelled Au Medoc. But there's a sort of a stigma to labelling things as Bas Medoc, so they simply get labelled Medoc. Chateau Loudenne is a large, well-sited chateau on the coast at a place called Saint-Yzans, which is a few kilometres north of the commune boundary with Saint-Estèphe. There are records, ecclesiastical records dating back to the 13th century, showing that wine was made on this site at that stage. There's speculation that possibly wine's been made since the 1st century AD, as there is a Gallo-Roman villa site, archaeological site nearby. But I think that's more speculation than actually proven. Certainly, the current estate the chateau was built in 1670 by a wealthy Bordeaux family of merchants who used the chartreuse as an escape from the city. In 1875, significantly, it was bought by the Gilbey family. Now, the Gilbey brothers were gin producers in London, so they had an established alcohol production and sale company, and they bought Chateau Loudenne as their headquarters in Bordeaux. So not only did they develop the chateau itself, they built large underground cellars, all sort of very modern and gravity for the time, gravity fed, with the idea that this was somewhere where they could use to process wines that were being made elsewhere, from other estates, that they could then distribute through Chateau Loudenne, because handily, being right on the coast, there's a wharf there for allowing river transport onto the Gironde. So yes, the Gilbeys owned Loudenne for 125 years. Gilbeys was taken over by Diageo. Diageo, a large group focusing mainly on spirits, decided at the end of the 2000s to get out of wine production largely, and sold off the estate. This was bought by somebody called Jean-Paul Lafraguette, a wealthy businessman. Unfortunately, he got into some economic difficulties. I think there were some legal proceedings or something, and he ended up having to sell the estate. So in 2013, it was bought by a large Chinese spirits group called Maotai. And Maotai had quite an ambitious schedule for investing in the vineyards and in the cellars to improve Chateau Loudenne. But unfortunately, they encountered some difficulty in moving capital into France. Initially, things seemed to settle down when they brought Camus Cognac, who were the distributors in France, in as a junior partner. But in 2021, the Chinese government changed the law to prevent the movement of large amounts of capital from China, and that meant that they could no longer fund this expansion project, this reinvigoration project that they had going, and so actually the estate fell into a position of being insolvent, and was bought by Christophe Gouache, who owns another estate elsewhere in Bordeaux, and currently he seems to have settled the property. There's work going on now to ensure that the vineyards are all certified as organic. So hopefully Chateau Loudenne is forging ahead once again. So what makes Loudenne special? It has quite a fortunate terroir, I guess. I mean, the estate's 132 hectares in total, with about half of that, slightly less than half of that, being in vine. But there's one plot, probably about 40 hectares, that spans two outcrops of relatively deep gravel, and that's over limestone soils. So you've got a situation where you've got deep, free-draining soil, which Cabernet Sauvignon loves, over water-retaining limestone soils. So whether if it's a wet vintage, it drains well. If it's a dry vintage, there's a good supply at the depth of water for the vines. So it's quite a nice situation. And of course, being right next to the Gironde, the vineyard climate is moderated by the water. So it's actually a really, really good site, although being in the Bas Medoc. There's some really nice viticulture being practiced there as well at the moment, as well as the organic side of things. I mean, everything is hand-picked into cagettes, so careful picking into shallow baskets to make sure the fruit isn't damaged. There's really quite gentle pressing in. They've got what you'd call a horizontal boucher press, so it's a modern basket press, I suppose you'd think of it as. And the wines are separated out into different pressings. They're fermented in stainless steel and concrete tanks, or with temperature control. The wine is run off into barrel, and it does its malolactic conversion in barrel, which is unusual for such a large property. That's quite hard work. That's a nice means of making the wine more approachable as a young wine. The wine ages in barrique in 225 litre barrels, as is standard in Bordeaux. A third of those are new. It's all French oak, so presumably a third new, third second, third fill. And it stays in there for 12 to 16 months aging. So quite a classic style. This particular vintage is 53% of Cabernet Sauvignon, 45% of Merlot, and 3% of Cabernet Franc in there. So fairly standard Medoc blend. So let's see what the wine tastes like, shall we? First thing to say is instantly you notice it's an opaque black red. If I look really hard, I can just see the stem of the glass looking down through it, but that is virtually opaque. As I say, red, purple, red. No, it's not purple. That's the point. There's no. There isn't a purple hint at the rim. It's a ruby red to black colour. It's staining the glass. There are tears forming. The wine is 14% alcohol. So it's hardly surprising. And let's have a look at the aromas. Those are relatively closed, fairly classic Bordeaux aromas. There's a relatively rich plumminess and some, I suppose, some rich black cherry fruit as well. There are hints of graphite, maybe a little cedar. And I'm searching for, but I'm not finding very much in the way of just a tiny touch of leafiness. This was a relatively ripe vintage, so the methoxy's probably burned off there. So let's have a taste. First thing to say, there's a lovely acidity. That's keeping that good and fresh. It's not particularly mouth-watering, but it does combine very nicely with some very fine cedary tannins. The fruit is ripe. It's not sharp, so you're not getting the sort of red currant notes. It's more red plum. You're not necessarily getting cassis notes. They're more in a sort of a black cherry, blackberry style there. The wine's medium-bodied, medium to full, because it's got that 14% alcohol rounding it out there. It's ripe. It's not particularly astringent, although there's the cedariness to the tannins. The grip is very fine, and the round, rich black fruit at the finish is stopping that from being astringent. The flavours are lasting reasonably well, but that drying note, although it's not astringent and harsh, is just perhaps bringing the finish up a little short at the moment. And I think as the tannins soften and as the wine ages, that will change and the flavours will last a bit longer, because there is a ripeness, so a ripe dark cherry and blackberry note at the finish there that sort of suggests that with age that will lengthen out. The tannins and the oak seem really well integrated in the wine. I mean 2016, really nice warm vintage in the end. I mean, it was incredibly wet to begin with, but again, I think this perhaps shows where vineyards that are next to the Gironde really benefit. Firstly, you've got soil types that allow water to drain, but at the same time are keeping sufficient water reserves for the vine to continue growing once you're getting drought conditions later on in the same season. So I think, you know, a nice, nicely powerful wine, but without being a huge blockbuster. It's got an assurance, it's got a length and a depth and a concentration, which is lovely without being over the top. I think it's a wine that would probably benefit from 2 or 3 years age, possibly more. Probably not going to age much beyond sort of 10-15 years. It's got structure, but it's not got tightness and nervosity from that point of view. It's a bit more open and a bit more rounded, and it's showing its richness quite nicely. But it's not just soft and juicy. There's enough structure to give it, you know, 10-15 years or so. So I'm actually really quite impressed with Chateau Louddenne's 2016. So thank you very much for joining. I hope you found the video interesting, and I do hope you'll join us again. Bye now.